You're listening to ABA On Call, hosted by myself, Rick Kubina, and Doug Kostewicz. This is your front row seat to the future of behavior analysis. Join us for fresh ideas, practical strategies, and bold conversations designed to inspire action. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to ABA On Call. Doug, today we're going to try something new.
Yep.
It's always nice to have new segments. And today we're going to start our series, and we'll do this occasionally. And it's called They Got It Wrong. And our first, the first person to say they got it wrong. And by the way, this is going to be related to psychology and behavior analysis, and that is Freud and psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I've heard of that person before. He sounds like, and most people who have done something with psychology have probably heard the name Freud.
Everyone's got to have heard. Everyone who's listening to this podcast who's involved has had an undergrad psych class. And even if you haven't, I mean, this guy is to this day still in the culture.
Hmm.
Let's start off and talk about like who was Freud and what was psychoanalysis. Let me put you on the spot, Doug, and give me that high level overview of what is psychoanalysis.
Well, I think if you were, depending on how high level you want me to go, I would say that it is a kind of a distilling of our motivations down to sex and looking at our battle with sex and looking at how the subconscious mind pushes and pulls us and all the different ways we kind of hide that unconscious mind from others or try to it looks like motivation, and all of it is sort of in that unconscious mind, not the brain, the unconscious mind.
Yeah, that's a good high level overview. If we're going to talk about Freud and what's he done, what's psychoanalysis, this came about. Freud came about because he wanted to help
Mm-hmm.
people. He was in psychology, and he has this theory, as you talk about, that is predicated on a lot of sexual
Yeah.
behavior. And like I can tell you when I first this is a little sidetrack story, but when I was an undergrad, this is 1985 is when I went to take my undergrad. So I'm dating myself here, but there was this guy that did abnormal psych, and he was a complete Freudian. He practiced psychoanalysis, and at the time I didn't know any better. I thought that this guy was so brilliant, so I'm like, oh my God, this Freud, I need to understand it. And this was like my, maybe my second semester where I was learning about this. So I read all these books on Freud, and I thought uh, Freud he's got it. And I really bought into it. I read all sorts of books, articles, and I can just remember that there's a lot to it. You talked about the unconscious mind. There's this, people talk about this metaphor, this iceberg metaphor, where you have your conscious memories, right beneath that are your unconscious memories, and then below that are these repressed
Mm-hmm.
uh, memories, all of these issues that you had. And this all revolves around these psychosexual stages that we're supposed to go through. And if we don't go through any of these stages, then we're just basically messed up as
Right.
humans. And the way Freud saw it, most everybody was messed up.
That was something. Yeah, I did find that interesting. That we're all messed up. That is sort of the answer. The idea that we all want to have relations with our mother, but we hate our father, and that
If you're a
if you're a
man,
man, and that's one of the problems with this is it's very masculine focused rather than feminine focused, and which could be a product of the time when he was doing the work that because this was I want to say early 1900s, right? No, yeah, 1900.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean
yeah,
that may be more of a what was going on in the time than really of anything else. So yeah, the stages, the battle between the id, the superego, the ego, everything was these different unknown processes that were constant struggle, and we were losing.
yeah. Those are structures that animates our behavior. To understand other schools of thought and psychology, it's important to know that, like all of us who are in behavior analysis, this is the difference between Skinner and every single other school of psychology, psychological thought. People like Freud sat down and said, you know what? I think this is based off of what I'm seeing. I think this is why people are behaving. In other words, he deconstructed human behavior based on just stuff he made up. I mean, what's the chance that this guy got it right by engaging in that type of? It's not even science.
No, it's
It's
not.
there's no falsifiability here. Like the psychosexual stages, and this is one of the things that happened with Freud is he made this stuff up. A lot of people got behind what he was saying at the time because, as you said, people are like, okay, yeah, this sounds real. This is a person who knows what he's talking about. They believed it. They started doing it, and they used this to treat people, which we'll talk about next. But the you can't falsify this stuff. So if you can't falsify some, this came from Karl Popper, and Popper said, look, if we're going to look at what a science is, and again, I'm not saying falsifiability is the gold standard, but it is something that we can use to understand what meets the threshold of something that we should look into. If you can't falsify what these statements are, then and it can't be tested, don't even go down that route.
Right. the I mean, there's so many different aspects that he's gone into, and I was just looking at even the highlights are a huge list of many different, as you said, made up things, and he tries to explain all these different processes and just gives them different names that he comes up with and makes up the psychosexual stages, the life and death. All behaviors are linked back to life and death. Are you doing things that are life or related to death? And so it's just like you said, his explanation for why he thought people behaved and did things. And anytime something else came up, he gave it a different name and did something different. So, yeah, there was never a chance to test anything. And
Yeah.
so,
The the fact that looking back now, it from where we stand, you're like, oh man, how could this happen? But it did happen, and many people tried to understand, like, why do humans behave. And you mentioned this earlier. You talked about the id, and I remember joking around back when I first learned about this with my friends, like, oh yeah, we would go out on Friday night and we're like, oh well, here's the id. The id is this part of us that is seeking pleasure, and whatever these instinctual drives are, the id is thought to be pushing people forward. And it made sense because if you're a psychoanalyst, you would look at someone and say, okay, well, the id is making them do this, and the ego, this conscious part, uh, might be in conflict with the superego, which is supposed to be our morality center. And how do you fix all this, Doug? Well, if you have the money and you have access to a psychoanalyst, you're talking about a good 20, 30 years of doing this talk therapy. And maybe you could be cured.
Well, and at the cost of moving into some of the implications, one of the big downfalls, and you brought it up, one of the big downfalls of psychoanalysis is how that process is. They're more concerned with what's going on and why it's going on than how to change behavior. That's why it takes so, quote, like you said, so long to get to anything. It's more about what is the problem and where did it emanate from and why. That's more of the issue. So yeah, this is a interest, and it's amazing. I guess my aside is how this, I guess it's just historical at this point, although some people still do practice it. But the idea is, how is this still shared in college intro to psych courses other than a historical, like we were here, but we've learned and gone past it. Let's hope that the other part
Yeah.
happens more often than the here we are kind of thing.
Well, let's wrap this section up and give the first secret word.
The first secret word is hysteria.
Hysteria. Okay, well, that's a pretty good one.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, that could lead us into our next section, which is let's talk about the implications of this. Uh, when you do psychology and you say this is a legitimate field, it's like medicine. When there were theories about medicine, guess what? People were treated based off of what the common theories were.
Yeah.
It used to be believed that before the germ theory came out, people really didn't understand why people got sick, and they thought, oh, there were demons, and
Mm-hmm.
there could be exorcists, or there could be leeches, there could be things that we know are not credible, and it's the same thing here with psychoanalysis. What are the implications of this? I can tell you one of the implications. Uh, there is a guy named Leo Kanner, and Leo Kanner was considered the discoverer of autism. And guess what, Doug? Leo Kanner was a psychoanalytic adherent. And his explanation for why children had autism was at first was toxic parenting, that well, the parents must have did something that was so horrific that these kids could not develop properly. And then, of course, that changed from blaming the parents to blaming the mother. And there was this thought that uh, the term was refrigerator mother. And the mother was so cold and uncaring and cruel. They just did something that completely messed this kid up. I mean, can you imagine being a parent and taking your child to these people that are supposed to help you, and the people that are helping you are looking at you with disdain and pointing their finger behind your back and like you're the reason why. Like I'm horrified
Mm-hmm.
by what these parents had to go through in the fact that all of this was because these people believed in psychoanalysis.
Well, I mean, that is that if you follow this and that's your explanation without data, that's horrible that they had to go there. I mean, my personal experience with this, so I worked at a facility that was transitioning from a psychoanalytic perspective of working with children who were wards of the court or had sort of emotional behavior difficulties or were, I don't want to say juvenile delinquents, but they were transitioning from a psychoanalytic model to a behavioral model. And there were still some psychoanalytic therapists, and I'm sure the listeners here would know that there's very little, if any, convergence regarding therapeutic goals or therapeutic techniques between behavior analysis and psychoanalysis. Well, kids were promoted to kind of let them do, and I'm using this term loosely, inappropriate, sometimes borderline dangerous behaviors because we would let them we were told to let kids express themselves because their
Mm.
repressed feelings. So kids were getting better at doing behaviors that were not generally socially acceptable, nor is it good for them to do that, or how to interact in a society. So it was a constant struggle that some kids would be allowed to do things that would set really bad models for other kids in these settings. And we all know, if you know, when you hit those contingencies or avoiding contingencies, you start to see an increase in these behaviors. But the excuse was those were these were repressed. That's this. They're trying to let them out. They're letting them be free. That once it's gone, then they'll be better off for it because they can't have these repressed. So you can see how the constant struggle that was going on didn't help some of these kids, but it was done, as you said, with your example. It was done under a way of treating that, like you said, happens just as much as other techniques. So,
I that must have been really a hell of a learning experience because you got your behavioral training, you understand contingencies, and you can see how behavior is being reinforced, but yet you have other folks that have this completely different mindset and aren't thinking about it like that at
no,
all.
they're not, and they don't look to the what's going on externally. They're going to somewhere where they can't see. They're going internal to the individual. They're trying
Yep.
to interpret behavior. So when Johnny punches me, it's okay because Johnny has repressed feelings. But Susie, who I've judged doesn't have repressed feelings, when she punched me, that's a problem. We need to stop it. What the heck are you talking about? They're both punching me and I'm getting hurt. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, and you can't really function in society if you're walking around punching other people in the face and head, unless you're in a boxing ring.
Yeah. The childhood trauma is real, but to think that this what you experienced is going to account for so much of what's going on in your life just on the face of it. uh, if you had an issue, sure, that's going to affect you in ways, but just thinking of all the things that we do moment to moment and trying to fit that into this idea is really challenging. I'll also point out, Doug, that when Freud came out at the time, people were trying to do and trying to follow and help people based on uh, Freud's theory. And as you said, they were based on these psychosexual stages. And because they didn't understand a lot of things, just many of the treatments were
Counterproductive.
counterproductive. Thank you for filling
No
that word
problem.
in. Like women who had hysteria, the thought was that you would do pelvic massage, and this was the common treatment. And unfortunately, for some women, there would be, if that didn't work, there would be surgeries where they would remove the clitoris, they would remove the ovaries based off of this completely uh, this theory that had very little evidence, very little empirical support, and it was just creating all of this bedlam that was happening, that was based off of this. I mean, this is what happens when you make stuff up that's not based on
One
science.
thing, another thing that I noticed within this process, the therapist often tells the individual why they're doing what they're doing. So it gives them this reasoning, whether or not this reasoning has anything to do with, like you said, their childhood trauma, whatever. And it can cause lots of, oh, you must have been abused. You must have not thought it was this, but you were definitely, that's why you're having these issues. And so it leans back to, if you don't have something that's based in data or based in falsifiability, it's very easy to fall in the trap of, I'm the really smart person that knows this. You don't know this as the client, so I'm going to tell you what it is. And I'll counter this with such as a behavior analyst. We may say we think we know why it's going on. We don't leave the situation. We take data and we check and see. And if it's wrong, then
Yep.
our idea was wrong. We throw that out. We take a new one. So we may be just as looking as smart, but we don't get tied to something that doesn't have any relationship to really what's going on.
Yeah. And that's well said. That is a nice way to think about what we have to offer is so much more humane. Like for me, I've always found behavior analysis is liberating. And that doesn't mean that when we're behavior analysts, but it doesn't mean you never consider other things that are out there. Otherwise, you risk becoming a closed-minded zealot, and you always have to be looking at falsifying your own stuff. But uh, it's very clear that when you look at psychoanalysis, and there have been many people from the APA that have written statements about Freudian psychoanalysis and have discredited or debunked most of it. But as you said earlier too, people are still doing Freudian psychoanalysis. Like a lot of people do psychoanalysis, but I think that field, I won't say I think, that field has moved on from Freud, but
I think it's
it's like anything.
psychoeducational now is the term that it's moving towards. If you want, they're taking more of the role of the environment, my understanding, and so it's starting to take on some aspects of behavior analysis, but they're looking at the environment, and so there's some testable things. I'm not saying it's a replacement to behavior analysis, but you're right. There are different types of psychoanalysis, and we're talking about Freudian here.
Well, that brings us to our second secret word, which is repression. Let's round this up and talk about, well, why was Freud wrong? And you and I have already touched on parts of this, but let's just talk even more. And there's several ways that you could look at why is this wrong. To begin with, understanding where did this come from? What's the
Yeah.
genesis of this theory? This guy made it
Yeah,
up.
that I think is the number one thing. That's not to say when people make things up, they're wrong. Okay, I think we
Sure,
need to be clear
sure.
about that. What happened is this person made this up and can't be tested, right? And so the combination of those two, you're left with just a theory that's untestable. And I think once you've got your measures over time of people who are helped, people who are not helped, how much horror people have had to go through, how much pain and anguish based on this, it's becoming less and less arguable that he was at all right.
Yeah. And I go back to what we did an episode a long time ago where we talked about Carl Sagan and the baloney detection kit, and just thinking about what's in the baloney detection kit, and there's a lot to it, but what and I think what we just talked about is what's the reliability of the source that's making the claim. That's one of them, and we just addressed that. Freud was a renowned figure of his time,
Mhm.
and we know that if arguments are based on authority, that's not the best way to understand and come to the truth of something. Yes, people can be authorities, and yes, they can be experts and have lots of information. But in this case, we're talking about a time when we didn't understand why people behaved as they did. Freud was born in what, the mid 1800s, so he was practicing and developing his theories in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and looking at fitting the facts to observations, talking with Freud's buddies, and like, oh yeah, yeah, I see this, and then together coming up with this psychoanalytic theory. That's an issue. But some other parts of the baloney detection kit, which I like, is looking at debate and how do people deal with criticism and evidence. And Freud, if you criticize Freud, you know what he would do? What was his go-to move? He would say, you have repressed issues and trauma, and the reason why you don't accept this is because you're a messed up individual.
Exactly. Exactly. And like you going back a little bit in history, how did we get there, right? What was before that was based on spirits, based on other things. So
Yes.
it was very appealing to take it a step further. The beauty of science is we'll continue to move. So it was a part of history. It was your fault if you don't believe them, right? That's not how things work. Now we say things like you have to check the data out. It doesn't matter about me, right? You check what the data says. If I'm wrong, the data will show X. If I'm right, the data will show X. So it's, whereas there it was, you're arguing with me. Well, obviously, you fell in love with your mom when you were way too young, and then you were this, you were that. It was your problem, and yeah. So you can't explain a theory on those baloney, or I guess those techniques for critical thinking, right? You can't, if you can't pass those, then you definitely are on high alert for something problematic.
And what's the evidence for this? You have a lot of the evidence was case studies. There are, I can still remember when I was, again, going back to undergrad, one of the famous case studies was Anna O. Freud had these names, and Freud and his colleagues like Joseph Brunner was another one of his co-conspirators, and they would share these case studies, and they would take years. And so the evidence was these case studies that was being driven by these people that were saying, believe me, this is what the evidence is. And let me tell you, if you get into that kind of situation where someone's saying, oh, believe me, I know that this is true, you set yourself up for all sorts of issues. Like, you can pick any kind of conspiracy theory, you could pick just anything. Someone could just make something up and say, oh, believe me, X is real because, I've seen it before. And because I've seen it and because of who I am, it is real. And if you don't believe me and you want to criticize my evidence, well, there's something wrong with you. Like, that is not the way to move forward in science. And it just sets yourself up to believing in basically
Yeah.
anything.
And I think you summarized it very well. It's you could have, these names could have entirely been different, and it would still mean as little as it does now as it did then. So I mean, although you could have called the id something else, it's trying to explain using circular reasoning, right? Right. You did this because of the id. Well, why'd you do it? Well, because of the id. The id caused me to do it. What, you're not explaining anything when you explain nothing.
Yes. Oh, that goes on a t-shirt right there. Uh, the the fact that, I mean, circular reasoning is, I think, Jack Michael. I remember when we went to grad school together, we read that Red Book,
Mm-hmm.
and Jack Michael had something on that on circular reasoning, and I got a SAFMEDS card, and that just stuck with
Yeah.
me my entire adult life. And what you said is absolutely money. And if we engage in circular reasoning, and when other people do, we have to immediately say, red flag, this is something that we have to be very skeptical
Yep.
about.
And we're not the only ones. I think that
Sure.
this is this was a easy um, podcast in the sense that I don't think too many people are going to argue with us that Freud got it right. This is definitely an example that did not hold up through the test of time, did not hold up through the test of data, and it's easy to see that he was wrong, and that's I don't want to. I'm not giving him permission that was okay, but people are wrong in history, and
Yeah.
that's why you need wrong so that you can figure out the better way of doing things. Because I would hate to have parents nowadays be blamed for things that had nothing to do with them, right? Like you said in your example, I would hate to have kids allowed to be permissive in what they do, because then they can hurt themselves and not really gain things. So I think that it's pretty easy to say he was wrong, and I think it's not going to be argued by many.
Yeah. Other than my undergrad psych professor, if that guy's still alive, I know he's still
And
psychoing and doing
he
psychoanalysis.
probably knows he's wrong, but that's probably because we have repressed problems that we haven't dealt
Right.
with. And if we would deal with them, we'd find out that maybe he wasn't quite as wrong. But I'm going to go with him being wrong.
One of Yeah, one of the looking at behavior analysis as an exemplar, when Skinner decided to figure out how do we know what behavior is real? How do we predict behavior? How do we control behavior? You know what he did, Doug? He said, I'm going to start off with animals. And he started off working with rats. He started off and he stumbled around, but he figured out this experimental chamber, and he came out to this notion that consequences select behavior, and then he started having colleagues that followed this very scientific way where you could look at, here's an independent variable, here's a dependent variable. I'm going to do a study, or I'm going to do a study, and here's my results. Can you replicate what I have? And people exactly replicated what
Yep.
Skinner was doing. And of course, this happened across the entire world. Everyone, not just in the nation of people, but people from other countries. And this is how we can come to understand is something likely to be true. And that is looking at science. And that's what sets behavior analysis apart from every other school of thought and psychology, is its beginning, is its roots in its replicability, its ability to predict and control at exceptionally high levels. And if we look at psychoanalysis, it's completely
Are
absent.
you just citing the first chapter of the White Book?
No, is that in
No,
there?
when you were doing prediction control, you're going the attitudes of science. I was going through the list of all the different things and how we follow those tenets. So, yeah. So that was a bonus review if you're going to be sitting for a BCBA exam or have a class in the first chapter of the White Book. So there you go.
There you go. I think that brings us to our last secret
And that
word.
word is displacement.
Displacement. Wow. Okay. We have given you some Freudian terms, so you can thank us for that
Yep.
later. But we would like to thank you all for joining us on ABA On Call. Thank you for being part of ABA On Call. Want to grab your CEU? Just click the link in the instructions, complete the quiz, enter the secret words, and pay the fee to download your certificate. You've done the work, claim the credit. Don't forget to subscribe and we'll see you in the next episode